In the construction industry, we've built incredibly capable organizations. Teams that can design complex buildings, coordinate across disciplines, and deliver under pressure. And in many ways, the systems we've created to do that work are highly effective. But if you talk to the people across our industry, there's another layer to that story. There's pressure. Pressure to deliver, pressure to coordinate, pressure to keep everything moving, often at the same time. And most of the time, we just accept that as part of the job. But when you start to look a little closer, that pressure doesn't just sit with individuals. It moves through teams, through processes, through the way organizations are structured, and how decisions get made. And then you add technology, new tools, new expectations, new ways of working, and suddenly those systems start to feel even more stretched. Not because they're broken, but because they're being asked to do more than they were originally designed for. So today we're going to explore that topic. What is it actually like to operate inside these systems right now? Where does the pressure show up? Where does it get amplified? And what is technology revealing about the way we work together? And from a leadership perspective, what are we starting to notice about how organizations are really functioning today? I'm joined by Andy Robert, CEO of Slantis, along with Matt Havlin from AECTechCon, to talk about what they're seeing across the industry and what it might mean for how we move forward. So thanks, both of you, for joining me today.
Thanks, Jeff.
Andy, do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and Slantis?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Andy Robert. I'm an architect as background as training. I was born in South America in a small country, but mighty country that is called Uruguay. And through the past 15 years, I've been working for the US market and industry. And for the past 11 years, I founded a company that it's called Slantis. Slantis is a technology and production studio built for architects and by architects. So what we try to solve is how companies continue to grow in the next 10 years. And I have also a co-founder. Her name is Mercedes, and she's also an architect, and she is the COO of the company too.
You're getting ramped up down there for the World Cup.
Yes, we're excited. We're like South Americans in general are like really big in soccer, so everybody's very hyped about the World Cup coming.
Yeah, very, very soon. 2 months, less than 2 months, I think.
Less than 2 months. Yes, that's correct. And I don't know, this is kind of like fun fact, but the whole country really stops when our national team is playing. Like you cannot find anyone in the street, and family gatherings, friends gatherings, everyone is just like really focused on our soccer national team. So yay, excited about it.
They do well.
Yeah,
Yes, thanks.
How about you, Matt? You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Matt Havlin. I'm chair of AC TechCon this year and also been manager at New Ground International. And I'm here just to join the conversation.
So I guess we'll start off, from a leadership perspective in the industry. What do you think is becoming most important right now in how AEC organizations operate?
I think, and like even having Matt in this conversation, this is critical. We've been revolving around this for a few months now. And for leadership now to really envision what the future of architecture will look like in the next, or like AEC in general, in the next 2 years, maybe, tech fluency for me is foremost. Like the leaders, I'm not saying they all need to know how to code, but they really need to understand how technology works and operates, and then how that applies to our profession and the delivery of buildings. So for me, one of the key things is tech fluency in general, like CEOs and even COOs and else are key. The other thing that we've been talking a lot is, and I think these are kind of like the two big pillars. I can expand a bit on others, but these for me are the two big pillars. The other one is culture, because change management is becoming foremost with what's happening with AI. So having a culture of, or building a culture around change, adaptability, which our profession is really not used to because we're a very traditional profession, I think is also key. So what kind of like cultural artifacts and what rituals and what type of strategies do we use for building a strong culture that can sustain the changes that are coming next? So I think those two are kind of like the two big things the industry should be looking at, and especially leaders in our industry.
Boy, it's funny you mentioned change because in about an hour and a half, I'm recording another podcast episode of Burnout Banter talking about change and the impact that change in our industry has on burnout. So I definitely agree with you that we're going through a lot of change. And, as technology increases at an exponential rate, humans are not increasing our operating systems at an exponential rate. And that gap that is created between the two creates a lot of stress for us. And I think leadership that learns how to kind of compress that stress area will have much more successful teams.
I think just to add to that, there's lots of different kinds of leaders that are out there, right? And I think what I've seen is there's still a lot of firms that remain in their own little bubble.
Yeah.
And they're holding on to things that they think is special because this is the way we've always done it, or this is the firm way, whatever, insert firm name, this is the way sort of deal. And I think, there's not enough leadership that actually gets out. They might send individuals to conferences and stuff, but I don't know that they really understand really what's happening in the industry. And so I think understanding, to your point, how to manage change. I think I said the last time we did a podcast together, we're creatures of habit, but it's those habits that we need to find how to change and create new habits. But then also, I think right now it's really difficult because things are changing so fast that it's hard to create habits right now. Because in 6 months, like you just created a new thing, but it's going to change. It's going to change.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, something that at least what I try doing a bit on, to your point, Matt, on the practical is, for example, with AI, the companies that are building these AI models are all the time publishing like papers, and like even last week they released a new model and they explain it. So I think one of the easy practical ways of trying to navigate change is first you need to understand what's changing, and you need to direct yourself to the companies that are like agents of change. So basically I'm following up on all of them and really understanding what they're talking about and what they're saying. And at least for me, it calms a bit more the anxiety because I have more information on what's happening. So I would say that as a practical takeaway, what works for me and might work for others is just reviewing the papers they are releasing and the updates that they are all the time publishing, just to be aware. And this goes to my other point, which is the tech fluency. Like you need to know what's happening. And there are like 5, maybe 6 companies, and you can even ask the AI to summarize them in like 5 key takeaways of what they are saying in those papers. So it's just like small nuggets of information. And now I think it helps release a bit the anxiety of like everything is changing really fast.
I think it's interesting, right? Like the old style of leadership where something would happen on the front lines, it would make its way back up to the top of the organization. The organization would make a decision as to what they're going to do with it, and then kind of push that back down throughout the organization. Doesn't really work anymore. It's much more the people on the front lines have to have the ability to adapt in real time and have to have the autonomy to do that as well.
Yes.
So
Totally.
I think, I've been in the industry for about 26 years, and I've seen a lot of improvement in terms of how people are treated. I still think there's a long way to go, but I think in some ways the industry has gotten a lot better, but in other ways, the advent of technology and Revit has in some ways made it worse. I think we've compressed schedules quite a bit, and we're being asked to do a lot more in a lot less time. So when you both look across the AEC industry, how do you think organizations are operating? And I think we all know what it feels like to be inside of them. So maybe just to get your perspective on that.
I can talk from my own experience at Slantis. So we are around 200 people now, and I founded a company. So when we started, we were zero, Mercedes and me, just the two of us, and we started growing. And when we hit a mark that in the business world is very frequent to discuss, like you stop having culture and knowledge sharing by proximity, which is the mark of around 50 people, you need to start developing kind of like your middle management layer, right? So we started doing that. And to your question, it rapidly gravitated into like, what's the right model to keep the culture of change and to continue having like this intangible like knowledge sharing that we're seeing and like this culture of learning, and how can we create a system where we continue to grow sustaining these assets, let's call it. So we review a lot of different business model organizations because in the end we are architects and we're designers, so it's a design problem in the end. So we explored different types of models, and there are several like holacracy and different types of hierarchies, network models. And we took a bit from each something that resonated with us to create kind of like a hybrid. We call it the ecosystem, but the whole point around it is there's a radical rethinking that needs to happen in terms of how we set up the context for what's coming next. And leadership should be thinking about that. Like for me, leadership is about creating the conditions for people to thrive. And what we are hearing more and more within our industry is burnout and schedules getting tighter and Revit getting harder. So how do we change the conditions so the people that are immersed in those organizations are able to really adopt AI, for example, or like propose new solutions or think a bit differently on how we've been practicing. So to your question, I think we are in the right time or in the right moment in history to rethink structurally and from a business model how architecture is developing.
Yeah, I would agree. Coming Matt.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you kind of brought up, Revit schedules being compressed, and it's like, oh, we can just revise it instantly, and that means we can push things through faster. And it seems like that concept people held on to and push it more and more and more instead of maybe taking a step back and saying, okay, this gives us a little bit more time to think about the design and improve the quality of the design process instead of trying to push it through even faster. I mean, being in the BIM role and whether you're BIM VDC, I always take things from a project lifecycle standpoint. And, one of the things that I learned early on about BIM was that, okay, upfront is going to take you a little bit longer, maybe cost a little bit more because you're doing model coordination and all this kind of stuff. But really, the savings and the schedule and the efficiency should come more on the construction side because you don't have a group of people standing around an issue in the field trying to figure out how the heck they're going to solve the problem when we're building before we build, or we should be building before we build, and it's already coordinated and ready to go. So
I think it's interesting to me because when I think about Revit, the thing that's gotten lost is the collaboration and the coordination, which is interesting
have
because
time.
it's designed to do that, right? But oftentimes, we used to sit around a table and try to work through something and come up with the best solution. And
Yeah.
I hear a lot now, like, oh, just go look at my model. It's in my model.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's great, but that doesn't really help me try to come to a great solution or figure out what changed in the model.
Yeah, it should be enforcing us to do that communication and that coordination. Revit's going to tell you if somebody has a hold of this. And then what was funny is this was some years ago. A user came to me and was like, I keep getting these warnings that so-and-so has it. Okay, get up from your desk, go walk 20 feet or however long it is and talk to them. Or pick up the phone if they're not in the office. Or, you can't forget about communication.
Totally. I can add to that, connected to what we were discussing before. BIM managers, as Matt, end up being kind of like the change agents, but it's so like the resistance sometimes is so big that they end up burnout because they are seeing what the problem is, but then nobody's actually helping solve it.
Well, it's interesting. So, what do you think organizations have done really well in how they've structured themselves, and how has that helped teams coordinate in the past?
Well, I think for some time, and this is what, by the way, I'm going to talk about at the conference, is the model of breaking things into part and like having a linear process of compounding a project serve us really well. The problem is that through platforms like Revit and else, you start having the ability of being able to deliver in different layers and different people communicate in real time. So things started overlapping. And I think the problem started being that we were still thinking in a linear process. So I think as of now, the system and the way we were organized serve us really well. Like we were able to do fantastic architecture as of now. The problem now is that the world has changed and the model hasn't adapted to what's happening with the tech. And I'm not even talking about AI, I'm talking about Revit. Like what Matt is describing is exactly the problem. Like you need to be communicating real time because the software allows you to be working real time, but then people are still like one step first and then the second and then the third. So by the way, the only way to solve that overlap is with communication, different ways of it, like even picking up your phone or having a very clear report that you can see real time. So I think that what worked really well as of now is the way that most architecture companies are structured. But the problem is what's coming next is we need to be thinking of what's next. Like the world is changing and the model needs to change with it.
I think a lot of us that end up in this industry are very linear thinkers. Maybe that's not true. Maybe I'm just talking about engineers because that's what I am. But I do think we tend to think in a very linear fashion, right? Like I'm going to do from here to here, and we want a
Yeah.
very organized path of how that happens.
Yeah. Again, that served us really well as of now, but the difficulty is thinking in layers now, I think, or what I've been seeing.
I guess I've got a follow-up question actually, which probably could involve both of you guys. Kind of seeing that, Jeff's an engineer, and then kind of what you're talking about, Andy, where you're removing the linear process, right? It's becoming a little bit more fluid. And
Mhm.
the comments I always get from engineers is, well, the architect keeps moving things and design changes. And so,
Architects.
so how do you see that being managed in your business model?
You mean changing things?
Yeah, so from a model management standpoint, from a project standpoint, where if it's not linear, or do you still have milestones within it to where, okay, we have to stop here, either for the engineer, or are you making the entire process more fluid as a whole?
We're working around that now. For example, something that we've been discussing, this is quite not finished yet, but we are working around producing reports real time from Revit that can assess the different stages that we are in the different consultants, for example. And that's also something that we've been seeing, like the milestones are somehow blurry, like 30% CDs are not exactly the same for structural than MEP than architects. So we're working on kind of like standardize that concept and then evaluating with data like how those models are, just like stack all together and what's the level of progress, but like real time that you're able to see real time instead of like working compounds milestone. What happens if we are seeing kind of like a photograph in any point in time of what we're working. So that's something that we've been discussing on how to do it and how to be able to understand better the level of progress we're in, for example. That's something that we've been discussing. Then the other point, which I think is, or something that we've been talking a lot, is the communication part. Like, what does communication really mean? Matt, to your point, it's so much easier sometimes to pick up the phone and it takes 2 seconds where like we need to book a Zoom call and now review like our plans. And like you already know because of the data of the model that that model is not quite ready. So kind of like how communication flows with the real-time data too. So communication has been a huge part. We are using a platform that is coming from the tech world that is called Notion. I don't know if you heard of it. We love it. And it's our kind of like go-to place for all comms to be centralized there.
Yeah, I was going to say communication too, because we always have this thing, right, of like, when's the background going to be locked, or when is it going to be at a certain point where I can do this? And I don't think anybody ever expects the background to be locked. Like, that's just not realistic anymore. I think what we're really asking for is like, okay, where's the point where you're going to start telling me that things have changed so that
Yeah.
I'm not having to go in and look all the time to see what's changed, or if there's an area I should avoid because we're not far enough along in that. I mean, I just wrapped up CDs on a project, and within the last 2 weeks, I redesigned the entire, like, as an electrical person, I adapted to the entire mechanical system changing. And there were parts of the building where the whole classroom evolution changed. And it was easier to just delete everything and start over than it was to try to make what I had work. And so I think it's just that idea of communicating like, hey, we're still kind of working on this area, so leave that alone. And maybe we're over here. You're good to go. And, if we change something, we'll tell you. I know that's a crazy idea, but it does make a lot of difference. And I agree, like earn value. When I've had to do that in the past, the hardest thing is trying to figure out like how complete you are with something. How do I assess, am I 50% done? Am I 55% done? Am I 60% done? And the earned value analysis isn't really very helpful without that, having
Yeah.
a good way to do that.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about pressure from the perspective of shorter schedules and some of the technology making our jobs maybe a little bit different, but where do you guys see the most pressure, friction showing up in our organizations, and how are leaders reacting or responding to that? Or are they?
Project managers.
That's a lot of pressure being a project manager, huh? I agree with that.
So project managers for sure, because of what you mentioned before, kind of like the schedule getting tighter and like the promise of the technology really solving a lot of this stuff, but then like using the same kind of mindset to compound in Revit, so it doesn't help. But then this is something I learned, like the term, I learned it a few weeks ago actually. I was in San Francisco and there's this idea, you probably know this, this is because English is my second language, but being a seller doer, like principals having to sell and deliver stuff, I think that's also a huge point of pressure too, like being able to keep up with the business side of things and like going out in the world to get new projects, but then also having to deliver the projects. I think that's a major, and I think those people are usually like goes down into the chain, like those people are adding that pressure into PMs. So again, there's a whole system structurally that it's definitely not flowing. Yeah.
I
So
agree. At the last firm I worked at, we had people who were just project managers, and then we had people who were project managers and engineers on their projects. So they took on the smaller
wow.
projects and often more of them. And that job, in my opinion, was so much harder than the job of being a project manager. And it's that idea of the seller doer. I was reading something a couple weeks ago that talked about the maker and the manager, and how they require very different things from our mind to be in making
Sure.
mode versus managing mode, and how we kind of set up our days in the industry where we're in meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, right? And so most people end up working at night because that's the only time that we've given them to get into maker mode where they can actually get something done without being interrupted. And I think that leads to what you're talking about too.
The incentive is billing hours. So, like, most of your awake hours should be billable, right? So, there's no incentive from a business standpoint to get away from that. So, yeah, I agree. And most of the people in our industry, we are even trained from school to not sleep properly. So,
I don't know about the
I don't know if in
engineers. We got plenty
engineering,
of sleep.
we chose the wrong profession, you say.
I know the engineers got it way better than we did in college.
Architects don't sleep.
Do you think the complexity of today's projects is starting to outpace how organizations are set up? And I'm going to caveat this because I think, are our projects I don't know if our projects are more complicated or not, right? I was just talking to an employee who just was visiting St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York
Okay. Yeah.
and just kind of looking at the detail that went into how that building was designed and all the neat little things that are worked into that. And our buildings maybe don't quite have that level of sophistication now. So I don't know what's making them more complex at this point, but curious what you guys think.
So actually, I had this conversation not too long ago with somebody, and they were referencing how drawings used to look, where the sets were way smaller and you just had some floor plans, some wall sections, and elevations, and boom. But I think what's changed is maybe more on the construction side. We don't have those craftsmen anymore that where, like my wife and I were just at a ballet the other night in the theater we were in. We're comparing different theaters, and it's just like the amount of detail that goes into those places. You don't see that anymore in new buildings. And definitely the architectural drawings didn't have every nook and cranny and specially detailed drawn out and designed or whatever, but you had a craftsman that took the design intent and could actually follow through, to where nowadays we talk about a lot about design intent, but we don't have the craftsmen that we used to anymore
But
to
also,
follow through.
yeah, I would say too, Matt, we may not have the relationships that we used to have because what's
Yes.
interesting, I've lived in Colorado my whole life, but I worked for a company that did a lot of work in Texas. And the drawings that were prepared in Texas were very different from the drawings that were prepared in Colorado because in Texas, there's this good old boy network where everybody
Right.
knows each other and everybody protects each other and
Good thing.
everybody works together. And that just didn't seem to be prevalent in Colorado. So I think our ability to create relationships with the people we're working with has maybe it's not progressed the way that it maybe used to be. And so that could be causing some issues too.
100%.
Yeah. Kind of like two things triggered. The first one is while Matt was talking, I was Googling how long did it take to build St. Patrick's, and it took 21 years.
So maybe they did have longer schedules than we do.
Yeah. So probably that is one thing. And the other thing is I'm coincidentally reading a book that it's called Connected. Really, really interesting book. And the book talks about exactly what you were describing about craftsmanship, which, I mean, not specifically about craftsmanship, but social networks. So these are two Harvard professors that did a research on how social networks really impact everything that surrounds us and even our health and our income and our built environment, and basically says that like once there is a knowledge in a group of people that gets passed along for kind of like acquaintances, and you don't necessarily need to be friends, so that kind of like set of knowledge travels among people, and that impacts, and that's basically how culture gets built. So what you're describing is that there's a knowledge that has been created there that it's just there and not in other places. So just trigger that interesting how to see it apply to our profession.
We were talking about craftsmanship and kind of bringing craftsmanship back and integrating it with technology so that the two work really well together in the last episode of this conversation with Dan and Matt from Snowhead. So I guess as
Yes.
we look ahead, what do you think leaders need to be paying closer attention to, not just in their projects, but how their organizations are functioning?
I would say, and coming from what I was discussing and even the craftsmanship conversation, leadership also has a lot to do with picking the right people and having the right people in your team. So like people that are open and like have this willingness to continue to learn and explore different paths and are really good, like coming from the craftsmanship point, are really good in their own expertise. Like I think those type of things are there always been, but now they're a bit more because you cannot, there's another book like The Growth and Fixed Mindset one. I think in the times that we are living, the fixed mindset will certainly not work moving forward. So you need to be able to surround yourself with growth and open mindset people in the next. And that's, I think, one of the key kind of like, if I would have to think about kind of like a CEO job description, it would be the two things that I told you at the beginning, like the tech fluency for sure, the cultural aspect, and certainly building an A team that has this kind of like open and willing to try and willing to navigate change to mindset. That will
Fail
be
too,
critical.
and to
Yeah.
fail
Yeah.
also. Yeah, and
And
have that be
fail
okay.
for sure. Yeah, for sure. And then of course all the other things like the financial aspect and yeah, clients and else. But I think surrounding yourself with the right people is the first big step for me moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've always heard you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. You want to be surrounded by people who are much
Yes,
smarter than you.
totally. That is so true.
Yeah.
And then empower them.
Yes. That's
Yeah.
that's a big point.
Yes.
How about you, Matt? What do
Totally.
you think people need to be paying closer attention to?
I think how to better manage change, just in general, because there's a lot happening, whether it's from the business standpoint, project standpoint, financial standpoint, industry standpoint, just to be aware of it and figure out how to communicate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
I
big
think that's
big
important.
element as well.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you both for being here. Is there anything else you want to add before we sign off or covered it?
No, that you should. I don't know if already said this, but you should be going to AC TechCon.
Yes, yes, you
That's
definitely
right.
should be. So if you enjoyed this conversation, Andy will be speaking at AEC TechCon, and I think on the second day. Is
Yes.
it?
Yes.
Yes,
Second day in the morning.
in the morning. So wake up
Yes.
early. Don't party too hard the night before. So yeah, we'd encourage you to join us there and continue the conversation in person. You can learn more about the conference and register using the link that we'll add in the description. So thanks everybody for listening to this AEC Tech Conversation.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.